God will take care of you. But how often do we put more stock in the power of our choices than the power of His providence? Oh, they go hand in hand. But Jesus, in preaching what we call the Sermon on the Mount, made this statement. Matthew 6:25, "Take no thought for your life, what shall we eat, what shall we drink, nor for your body, wherewithal shall we be clothed? Is not the body more than meat, and the life more than raiment?" Yes, those words are generally applied and being overly concerned about whether or not we will have food, whether or not we will have clothes. But let's ask this question. Have you ever stood in a closet full of clothes and racked your brain trying to decide which garment to wear? Have you ever stood in front of a refrigerator full of food and couldn't seem to make up your mind what to eat? Have you ever been in the situation where there are plenty of options and perhaps too many? What am I going to eat? Or where are we going to eat? Where will we go to get food? What will I wear? Have you ever stood there for minutes, maybe even an hour, trying to decide what to wear for a typical day? Sometimes decisions can be crippling, even some of the smallest ones. Then there are those bigger decisions. What career will I pursue? What sort of education will I endeavor to obtain? Who should I date? Should I marry? Where will we live? Should we buy this car? Should we buy this house? Should I obey this gospel? There are important decisions to make. And the decisions that face us in life demand the ability to decide and be decisive. Choices will vary in importance. They always have. From the time man was put into the world, he had choices. Some had moral consequences, some were just matters of preference. You think about Genesis 2, picking up at verse 15. God put man in the garden and He said, dress it and keep it. That is an obligatory direction. And if man decides I'm not going to do it, he's going to commit sin by omitting what God had said to do. But then Genesis 2:16, of all of the gardens, all of the trees of the garden, thou mayest eat freely. Man had an option. Man could choose which tree he wanted to use for his meal. Adam could have chosen the banana. He could have chosen the apple. We don't know what fruit was that fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We're not trying to guess. The point is, he had an option about what kind of food to utilize, and he could have chosen any. And then there was, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, thou shalt not eat of it. There was a prescriptive command, there was a permissive instruction, and there was a prohibitive command. But all three were going to be a matter of his choice. Do I follow or do I not? Do I make use of this or do I make use of that? When it comes to choices, there are important decisions we face. Now, at this point in life, there are likely important decisions on the horizon for you. Maybe you're a young person trying to decide, what school will I choose? What career will I pursue? Will I wed? Maybe you're a bit further along in life and you're trying to decide, what investments will we make? Or will we sell and buy again? Where will I worship? Yes, there are major decisions that have to be faced. The ability to make decisions begins to be developed early in life. The goal of any good parent is to bring up a child that is able to be exercising a like-minded independence. No good parent seeks to instill within a child a sense of permanent dependence. We never wanted our sons to move out and then call every morning and say, should I have Fruit Loops or Cocoa Puffs? We want them to be able to make decisions, and not only in what to eat, but in how to make right decisions in God's sight. Decision-making ability is needed before a person is ready to leave parents' home. That's part of what's involved when Moses would say concerning an adult making a decision to marry, therefore shall man leave father and mother and cleave unto his wife. Are they able to leave father and mother? Are they ready to make their own decisions? Not only is it needed in order to leave a home, but it's needed in order to lead a home. Think about the words that Paul said concerning the relationship of husband and wife. Wives, submit to your own husbands as unto the Lord. The husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. Is she able to make a decision whether or not to marry this person, to be confident in her decision? Is he able to make a decision whether or not to marry? And when it comes to the established home, has he learned decision-making abilities enough to be able to lead? There has to be a balance here. There has to be enough humility in order to listen. There has to be enough confidence and decisiveness in order to be able to choose. James, in writing to Christians, would deal with the idea of those that were vacillating in their decisions. He would actually tell them, James 1:5, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. Let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. He that wavereth is as a wave of the sea, driven with the wind and tossed. Let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. Don't miss James 1:8. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. This double-mindedness has broad application, but it will absolutely include those who are vacillating in their decision-making abilities, those that are doubtful. Indecision is going to bring instability. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. In faith, he'll be unstable. He'll question truth, learn truth, accept truth, doubt truth, leave truth. And sometimes he'll be on a perpetual yo-yo. He'll be unstable in faith. He'll be unstable in life, in the home, and relationships. Some call it analysis paralysis. Too fearful to make a decision. Too fearful to be confident in decisions. Then there are those that venture to the other extreme. They call it extinct by instinct. The ones who make decisions so flippantly that they bring about their own downfall. Modern terms to describe this fear of decisions include decidophobia. That's actually a term. Decidophobia. And then there is decision-making anxiety. Maybe you're a teen. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you're a husband. Maybe you're a wife. Maybe you're single. Maybe you're married. Maybe you're a Christian. Maybe you're an elder. Whatever the case, whatever role you occupy in life, are you capable of making choices for self? Oh, there's a place for taking counsel, absolutely. Proverbs 1:5, a wise man will hear, will increase learning. A man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsels. Are we capable of taking counsel and making choices? Let's consider 5 ideas. Number 1, let's look at the idea of the clues that would indicate decision-making anxiety. What does this look like? A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways, but what are some practical descriptions of the one that's double-minded? Well, is there that fear of making a choice? Terrified of the potential of a negative consequence. Well, what if I wear the wrong color today? Or what if I choose this menu item and there was a better one? Then there are the fear of those more important choices going awry. What if I choose the wrong route? What if I choose the wrong job? The fear of making the wrong choice typically becomes disproportional to the actual risk. Did you know that there will be no long-term consequences, no life-changing repercussions if you don't choose the best menu item at a restaurant? It's just one meal. Yeah, so you missed out on the chicken parmesan because you went for the burger. There are worse travesties in life. Sometimes the risk is far more disproportional in the mind than the reality. The outcomes become magnified. The thinking becomes irrational. Fear of making the wrong choice. Sometimes this will manifest as a feeling of being overwhelmed or a feeling of panic. Maybe it's by the number of choices. There's an overload of options or the potential consequences. Maybe it's an inability to consider just where the options might lead. Sometimes it will manifest in overthinking. an excessive amount of time spent evaluating a decision, analyzing options, trying to formulate scenarios. Sometimes it manifests in an endless string of what ifs. What if this? What if that? No, there has to be a certain amount of prudence in decision making. Proverbs 22:3, the prudent foreseeth the evil and hideth himself. The simple pass on and are punished. There must be a balance. But when decisions are procrastinated, perpetuated, while someone continues to look for additional information that's not there, that's called overthinking. And regarding the procrastination, that's going to be another indicator. Procrastinating decisions or avoiding making decisions, delaying decisions by avoiding them altogether. Some people will delay decisions because they're looking for additional bits of information, simply to inform the decision-making process more. The law of rationality requires arriving at a conclusion warranted by the evidence. But it is an absolute fact in life that we will not always get all the information that we want before we have to make decisions. And more often than not, the longer we wait to get more and more and more information, we miss the window of opportunity. Procrastination, avoidance, delaying decisions. Sometimes it's because we're looking for more information. Sometimes we're hoping for doors to close, for options to become more limited. We're hoping for a series of events and things beyond our control to limit the choices so that there's less of a chance that we'll make a mistake. I've got a 50-50 shot at this one. There are only two options. Oftentimes people will come to me, preacher, I've got a question. One of my favorite things to say is, make it true or false. I've got a 50-50 shot at that one. But how often is it the case when it comes to life's choices? We're hoping for at least a 50-50 shot, because when we've got more than two options, it does indeed become overwhelming. And so we procrastinate. Sometimes we procrastinate in hopes that others will make decisions for us. Sometimes we procrastinate, and then eventually when we make the decision, we spend the following days, weeks, months, and years looking for reassurance for others. Did we make the right choice? Are we relying on others to not only to make the decisions for us, but maybe we're relying on their reassurance and their support so that we feel like we've avoided responsibility, or at least avoided those errors. Then there's impulsiveness. Yes, impulsiveness can be an indication of a decision-making anxiety, because it's the person that responds to the extreme. Well, I can't know the best decision to make, so I'm just going to get it over with, instead of taking a reasonable approach to gaining what information can be gained, giving what consideration can be given. It becomes ironic when the individual that is afraid of decisions makes them flippantly just to put them in the rearview mirror. Remember that there are clues for decision-making anxiety. Chances are each of us has manifested one of these traits to some extent, but when they're constant, repeated, debilitating, that's when we need to stop and ask, am I double-minded? Do I really know how to make decisions? Remember the clues and remember the causes of decision-making anxiety. What leads to a person being double-minded and unstable? Well, one of those causes for the anxiety will be that information overload. Overwhelmed by too much data, too many choices. It becomes hard to sort through the information, hard to make a clear decision. Yes, we deal with information overload. But another cause can be a fear of failure. This could, it may not be, but this could be the biggest motivator. Fear of failure can result from people having bad past experiences, prior bad choices, prior negative outcomes. And so they would rather have a decision loom on the horizon, hang in the balance, than to pull the trigger, to make the call, to open the door, and face any negative repercussions that might, I repeat, might follow. Then there's the impact, not only the idea of bad choices bringing negative outcomes, there's the impact on mental health. Depression, attention deficit, hyperactive disorder, anxiety disorder. These can not only lead to, but these can stem from such anxieties. Generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder can cause, but can also be consequences of just this fear of making a decision. And then there's perfectionism. Always got to get it right. Always have to have the perfect choice. And unless I have the perfect choice, I can't make any choice. Seeking the perfection can result in paralysis and anxiety. Any outcome short of the ideal outcome becomes unacceptable, and it's seen as a failure. This might be the one that causes a person to look too long at the menu because I have to have what's best. I have to make the best choice. This might be what causes a person to shop too long for a vehicle or for a house or for a spouse. This might be the one that causes people to miss so many opportunities because if it's not absolutely perfect, it's not good enough. By the way, this is another aspect of it all. Are we willing to acknowledge what's good enough? We're not talking what's good enough for government work. That's a completely different area of consideration. That's mediocrity. But are we willing to accept the fact that not everything has to be ideal perfection? And some things can be sufficient. Paul was willing to say, I've learned in whatsoever state that I am therewith to be content. Philippians 4. Perhaps Paul's mindset of being willing to be content would go far toward dealing with the perfectionism. And maybe sometimes this fear of failure is just a learned behavior. What do we mean by that? Well, some people are taught to be dependent at home. They're taught by parents who have this need to be important and need to be needed. And so as the toddler becomes a tyke, and as the tyke becomes an older youth and becomes a teen, options are limited. Choices are rare. The ability to make choices is not developed. And before long, this person has a permanent sense of dependency instead of the ability to make decisions and face consequences. Hey, parents, sometimes we can instill in them an anxiety of choices because any wrong decision is magnified, amplified, and over-exaggerated in the way that we react. Instead of learning to deal with these things and encourage, hey, there could have been a better choice, but it'll be okay. There comes a point where we need to be willing to say, that could have gone better, but it could have been worse. And in instilling that sort of a mindset, we can mitigate some of the overblown consequences that people so often see in looking at the choices that lie before them. Sometimes this learned behavior will come from older relatives who already exhibit an anxiety, and they're the people that walk around with worry warts on their hands. You know what a worry wart is? It's a blister. Or I've been rubbing so much because I'm so worried about every little decision. Let's not bring up the next generation to harbor the same unnecessary fears that we may have harbored. This can also be learned not only in the home but in the church. Thank God for elders who don't micromanage. And thank God for elders who are willing to look at what the deacons are doing or the Bible teachers are doing and the preachers are doing and see where maybe that could have been done better, but it could have been worse. That are willing to look at something that perhaps was a mistake and say, let's learn from it and move forward. And thank God for congregations that will do the same thing for their preachers, for their Bible class teachers, for their deacons, and for the elders, when the elders may have a decision that they wish had gone better. It's very much the case that the way others react to what we perceive as failures will contribute as to whether or not we have a fear of failure in the future. There are causes to decision-making anxiety. Sometimes it's information overload, a fear of failure. Sometimes it's just low self-esteem. Frequently, this low self-esteem is an instilled trait connected to an upbringing that taught a fear of failure. Sometimes the low self-esteem is just an uncertainty in self or a negative view of one's own judgment. This can often be the consequence of past mistakes as well. Sometimes it's a lack of prioritization. Here's what we mean by that. It can be hard to be decisive when a list of prioritized attributes are not clearly defined. What's going to be most important in this decision? Saving a life or making sure I don't get blood on my pants? What's going to be more important in this decision? Saving funds or making sure we have a roof over our heads? What's going to be more important in this decision? The example I set for my son or my daughter, or making sure they know that this rug can't have that kind of a spill on it. That's just terrible. Whenever we face the decisions that we have to make in life, do we have a predetermined set of priorities? Do we see what's important? And at times, are we willing to step back and think about, okay, what should the priorities be in this choice? And then there's external pressure. Societal expectations. Sometimes they're instilled because people think so highly of an individual. You've shown such promise. You've always done everything right, and now I have to keep doing everything right. I can't make a mistake. Some of the greatest blessings in life are hiccups. Some of the greatest lessons are learned from regret. Let's hope that regret doesn't have to be the kind that lingers throughout life and redefines someone's existence. But it's okay to learn from a mistake, provided that the mistake actually brings a lesson. Societal expectations, peer pressure, they can intensify a feeling of needing to make the right decision all the time. We don't want to be wrong in our relationship with God. At the same time, it is incumbent upon every soul, every heart, every mind, that we look in the mirror and see someone who's human, who's capable not only of blundering, but of recovering and moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, let's remember the clues of decision-making anxiety. Remember some of the causes, and let's remember the consequences. Consequences, absolutely. Because decision-making anxiety can indeed be debilitating. It can disrupt daily life, daily routines, make it hard to manage everyday tasks. Going to the grocery store becomes a 2-hour event instead of a 20-minute run because every item taken from the shelf has to involve an extra 5 minutes worth of math to make sure that we're getting the right cost per ounce. The best stewardship or the best bang for the buck. It can result in disrupting daily life, not only in shopping, but in other decisions as well. It can impact personal relationships. And what we mean by that is this: it can strain relationships as individuals may come to rely too heavily on others to influence their decisions or to make choices before them. It can attract in our lives those that manipulate. Because when I'm the one willing to be easily influenced, when I'm the one afraid of making decisions, when I'm the one looking for someone else to lead me so that I don't have to be the one that made the mistake, I will attract those that are manipulative and authoritarian. Sometimes that's a contributing factor to the one that marries a manipulator, to the one that only seems to be courting or dating the manipulators or drawn to manipulative bosses in workplaces, because their willingness to take charge feels good at first. It feels comforting. It's okay to recognize those whose behavior goes beyond helpful, ventures into manipulation, and make the confident decision for self that I don't have to be treated that way. It can impact daily life. It can impact personal relationships. It can impact a person's career. Because as individuals decide that they're afraid of taking on new challenges, they're afraid of trying new tools or responsibilities, they find themselves limited in certain roles. And yes, it can impact mental health. Just as mental health can lead to the anxiety and the depression, that fundamental fear of making decisions can actually metastasize into other fears as well. And it can impact self-esteem and an overall view of life. When we're talking about this idea of decision-making anxiety, we're talking about something that's very real, very common, very dangerous. So we've noted the clues, we've noted the causes and the consequences. Let's take a few moments to look at some corrections for decision-making anxiety. What do we mean by that? Well, number one, prayer. Before James said a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways and identified the problem, he began with the solution. If any of you lack wisdom, if you feel like you're not ready to make decisions, if you feel like you lack the wisdom to make the right choice, if you feel like you lack wisdom in your interactions, if you're unsure about who you ought to be or how you ought to proceed, if any man lack wisdom, ask of God. He gives to everyone liberally and upbraideth not. God will not chastise you for going to Him and saying, I need help. I don't know the right choice. You know, maybe if we would have used this approach in some of those small decisions that seem to take so long, it might cause us to see the lunacy of some of our over-pondering. Can't you just imagine the person standing in front of the closet, Lord, help me to make the right wardrobe choice. Lord, never mind, I'm going to stop this. Can you just hear it? If when we're overwhelmed by a decision, we'd start to turn to God. And as we do so, we listen even to the very nature of the prayer, and we start to think, am I manifesting fear that ought not be there? Not only can this help us by allowing us to analyze ourselves and cultivate an awareness of what our fears are, but it also can cultivate some confidence. James 4. James addressed folks who didn't appear to have any sort of anxieties on their parts as they made their decisions. James 4:13, go to now, ye that say today or tomorrow we'll go into such a city, continue there a year, buy and sell and get gain. These are those movers and shakers who knew where they were going, when they were going, what they were going to do, how long they were going to stay, what the outcome was going to be. Whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow. What is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and vanisheth away. What you ought to say is, if the Lord will, we shall live and do this or that. Here were some that lacked any reservations about their decisions. Even the reservation of stopping so long to say, if the Lord will, we shall live. When we go to God in prayer, especially about those decisions where we just carry an uncertainty, then we're trusting in His will. We're trusting in His providence. We're also trusting in His wisdom. And in the fact that when we go to Him for wisdom, He gives us an opportunity to learn. Now, we cannot go to God and pray for wisdom and expect Him to instill it supernaturally. When we go to God and pray for wisdom, He's going to give us opportunities to learn. He's put a book in front of us filled with wisdom. The Bible as a whole, the books of Proverbs and James in particular. Oh, the lessons to be learned about decision making just from those two documents. He's given us the wisdom we need. Will we take His word? Will we open our eyes to life, applying His word to it and learn from it? If we'll go to God in prayer, then we can indeed cultivate a confidence in our decisions. Proverbs 3, beginning in verse 5. The Proverbs writer gave a strong encouragement to put self to the side and trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not to thine own understanding. That's one of the problems with decision-making anxiety. I'm leaning to my own understanding. It's all on me. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not to thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge Him. In all thy ways. In all thy ways. There are ways that we have to choose. As a matter of fact, we could rightly look at Proverbs 3:6 and put, in all thy choices, acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths. Do we truly turn to Him for the choices that we face in life? Do we go to Him in a sincere prayer for wisdom and understanding? Eyes open to what's before, and a mind guided by God's Word instilled in the heart. When we go to God in prayer, we can have a confidence. Challenge negativity. Here's another correction for decision-making anxiety, because frequently it's the result of a negative mindset. Proverbs 15:13, all the days of the afflicted are evil. That's the pessimist. He never has a good day. Every day is a bad day. May have mentioned this before, but in New Orleans there was a sister that was there when we moved there, and she always had something negative to say about life. How are you doing was always responded with some complaint. And so one day Melissa said, how's your left foot? She said, my left foot's fine. Well, good. I'm glad there's something good about you. That sort of changed her perspective on some things. It adjusted her attitude, and she laughed about it for years. And it opened her eyes to how negative she was at times. How negative are we? All the days of the afflicted are evil. When we look at our decisions, do we only look at the pessimistic outcome? Well, that won't go right. That's what's going to go wrong here. That's what's going to go wrong here. Let's challenge the negativity. Let's challenge that anxiety, identify it, and decide, that's not who I want to be. Proverbs 15:13, all the days of the afflicted are evil, but he that is of a merry heart hath a continual feast. Now, we don't want to become flippant, but there is a place for looking at choices and being willing to say, hey, I'm going to apply God's wisdom in this decision, and it's going to be all right. It's going to be okay. Let's choose positive thoughts. When Jesus said, take no thought for yourselves, Matthew 6:25, He used the word merimnao, and it contains the thought of anxiety. Paul used the same word in Philippians 4, when he said, be careful for nothing. Now, don't be anxious for anything, Philippians 4:6, but in everything with prayer, we just mentioned it, and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. How to overcome anxiety? Well, part of that is going to God in prayer. The peace of God that passes understanding will keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Don't miss Philippians 4:8. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, honorable, just, pure, lovely, of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. How often is it the case that we get so caught up in negative thought processes that is where our minds turn every time a decision arises? Every decision is viewed with a level of pessimism instead of optimism. Every decision is viewed with us not looking at the things that are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, and of good report, but staying so focused on the negative what-ifs that we fail to miss the what-could-bes, or even the what already is. Let's focus on a positive mindset. Yes, the prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself. There's absolutely a place for being aware and being cautious, but not to the point of crippling life. And seek support. Galatians 6:2, Paul said, bear you one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Connect that with James 4:16. We usually read this verse and apply it to sin, and that fits. But James said, confess your faults one to another and pray one for another. Sometimes our faults are not inherently sinful, so to speak, but they're weaknesses. They're the things that slow us in life. They're the things that hinder us in what we truly could be to God's glory if we get ourselves out of the way. Will we confess our weaknesses one to another? Will we talk with our brethren about, sometimes it takes me 5 minutes to decide whether to wear the brown shoes or the black ones. Will we talk with our brethren about how sometimes it takes me 2 hours to decide whether to respond to a text message or not? We talked to our brethren about how sometimes the anxieties that fill us are slowing us. Will we get the support, the encouragement from them that we need? Know thyself. One of the corrections for decision-making anxiety is a knowledge of self. Proverbs 22:6. Instruction for parents. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. The idea is not train up a child in the right way and he'll stay on the right path. The way that he should go refers to the way that he is bent, according to his leanings, his own proclivities. Train up a child according to who the child is. And when he's old, he won't have to try to find himself. He won't depart from who he is. Do you know who you are? Maybe you were brought up in a home where when you were ready to leave home, you really weren't ready to leave home because you didn't know who you were. Folks, there are those that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s that have only recently started to learn who they really are. We choose who we are, but we also learn what our strengths are. We have to identify how we learn, what our capacity is. Do you know who you are? When we know ourselves, then we tend to know our decision-making processes. And when we know our decision-making processes, we tend to identify the strong points and the weak points. A couple of other ideas: breakdown choices. Some choices are major decisions that involve a series of supporting decisions. Break down those choices. Divide the large ones into more manageable steps. Focus on the present. Use techniques that will help us keep ourselves removed from looking so far into the future and what the subsequent problem could be, this route, and this route, that we will indeed allow ourselves to base every decision on the here and now and a reasonable forecast of what could be. One way for people to stay grounded is to use what's called the 3-3-3 technique. And it's the idea of identifying 3 sights that I see at the very moment. Well, there's a wall, and there's a door, and there's a dog. 3 sounds that you hear at the moment. There's a fly buzzing, or there's a dog panting, or there's a TV playing, and then 3 motions. There's a breeze blowing, there's a leaf moving, or there's a dog wagging its tail. Whatever the sights and sounds are may seem completely irrelevant to the decision, but if they bring you back to the moment, the here and now, and they ground you in the decision that's right in front of you, then that's far more beneficial than our brains being in the sky, so focused on what ifs that we fail to see what is. So, focus on the present, and then there's something called exposure therapy. And a short description of that is this: practice facing the challenges that are so overwhelming. Start them on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of decisions, and practice putting self in situations where those sorts of decisions have to be made, with those that rate it a 1 or a 2. And then graduate to higher intensities of decision, and before long, making those decisions that seem to rate at a 9 or a 10 become a lot smoother. They're the clues, the causes, the consequences, the corrections, and then finally, here are some words of consolation regarding this idea of decision-making anxiety. Some statements to keep in mind. If you're going to make a mistake, at least make it full speed. That's what Coach Toner said. He put me at nose guard and he said, "Scott, you're going to play this position." I said, "Yes, sir." And then in trying to remember what all the techniques were, what all the plays were, what all the motions were, there were times when that nose guard moved too slow. And all that needed to be said was, listen, it's okay to make a mistake. Just make it full speed. Because so often it's the case that we slow down so much in trying to choose what's right that we fail to do anything. Doing something is better than doing nothing more often than not. So when it comes to choices, if you're going to make a mistake, make it full speed. keep in mind that there are exceptions to this. Don't try to use this on the highway and then blame Scott. Number two, when it comes to choices, some are matters of moral right and wrong. And there's a clear yes or no. Some are matters of what's wise and foolish. Some choices are a matter of what's good and what's going to have an uncomfortable or negative outcome. But some of the hardest choices to make are the choices that are a decision between something good and something good. And we find ourselves trying to weigh what's better and what's best. And sometimes we miss both because we can't choose either. Sometimes it's a matter of live and learn. There are some choices where it's not a matter of right and wrong, but it's a matter of good or better. There's no wrong decision in such cases. It's just a matter of making a choice. Not every outcome can be planned. Not every outcome can be predicted. Remember, only God is omniscient, and you're not Him. So there will be unpredictables, there will be unforeseeables, and there will be unpleasantries. But don't let them stop and cripple you, paralyze you from making the next choice. And if you're going to fear anything, fear God. Fear God, keep His commandments. This is the whole of man. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Proverbs 1:7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Proverbs 9:10. Fear God, and that will inform so many decisions. And finally, trust God's providence instead of just the path of least resistance. Too often it's the case that we decide to choose the path of least resistance because it seems like the easiest choice. That doesn't necessarily mean that God's providence opened those doors. Some consolations for decision-making anxiety. Do you have a history of poor choices? It's okay. So did Abraham. So did David. So did Peter. So did Paul. And look what God did with them. Do you have a history of poor choices? That doesn't mean you have to have a future filled with them. But it is time to make choices and make the kind that are reflective of being informed by the Lord. And there's no decision greater than the decision to take the straight gate. Jesus began to close the Sermon on the Mount with enter at the straight gate, because wide is the gate and broad the way that leads to destruction. He gave a set of choices and He made it clear. And then as He spoke with His apostles in Matthew 16, He said, whosoever cometh after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. There's a choice, Jesus or me. There's no greater choice than the choice to become a Christian. The choice to profess, I believe He's the Son of God. I've committed sin. I want to be washed of it. I'm ready to be baptized in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins. There's no greater choice for the fallen child of God than to come home. So maybe a decision lies before you this afternoon. Don't be undone by indecision. Sometimes there's not a right choice, but right now there is. And if you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, why not take the opportunity while we stand together and while we sing?